Sialic acids are very anti-inflammatory. Basically, they act as a switch between preventing and promoting inflammation.
Dr. Lucija Sironic is UK-trained medical doctor. She has her GMC and CMC medical licenses. I met Lucija first when I received a review of the GlycanAge test that I took, and we spent quite some time digging into the results. She shared that she has curiosities in many things, including AI-based technologies to predict patient outcomes. And from her LinkedIn profile, she is, quote, working to bring lab findings closer to everyday life and the ultimate goal of prolonging human health span, improving disease prevention policies, and lifting the pressure off the public healthcare systems globally.
Caloric restriction having a significant sort of effect on prolonging lifespan, but I think also more importantly, optimizing health span. But I think what's important to say is that
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Welcome to the next talk on the Uncovering the Secrets of Longevity Live Beyond the Norms Health Summit. This next speaker may be my favorite speaker yet. As all good longevity experts do, I have taken a number of biological age tests. There are a number of different tests out there. You could be looking at things like DNA methylation. People may look at telomere length. And some may look at glycans. What are glycans and how can they tell us anything about our biological age, you ask? Well, we are about to find out. And if you're wondering why this might be one of my favorite speakers, it is because her test showed my biological age to be significantly younger than my chronological age, and who doesn't want to have that great news? Dr. Lucija Sironic is UK-trained medical doctor. She has her GMC and CMC medical licenses. I met Lucija first when I received a review of the GlycanAge test that I took, and we spent quite some time digging into the results. She shared that she has curiosities in many things, including AI-based technologies to predict patient outcomes. And from her LinkedIn profile, she is, quote, working to bring lab findings closer to everyday life and the ultimate goal of prolonging human health span, improving disease prevention policies, and lifting the pressure off the public healthcare systems globally. That is a very noble goal. I really appreciate that. Dr. Sironic, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on the show, Chris.
All right. Before we get started, what is your background? How did you end up studying medicine and becoming a doctor? And then maybe talk a little bit about how you kind of shifted into your current focus now.
Yes. So, I'm 27 years of age chronologically. So about 10 years ago, I was thinking about what to study. And I really wanted to always work with people. I was interested in science, but I think medicine in the end prevailed simply because of that human contact. I applied to a few unis in the UK and after a rigorous process managed to get in. And that was really quite something for me. I always wanted to go abroad and study. And yes, I think it was really a combination of sort of science, human contact, and, as a 17-year-old willing to do something good for the world, I guess.
Very cool. So helping humans, and also you get to tick off two boxes by going abroad and actually studying what you already have a passion about.
Yeah, exactly.
So as a medical doctor, right, you've kind of transitioned and you're working with GlycanAge. What was that process work? Are you still practicing? Have you kind of stopped that and now you're focused with GlycanAge?
So when I graduated, I worked for about 2 years in medicine. It was just when the pandemic started, when the pandemic hit the UK, and as you can imagine, those were not the best and most fun years. I think the pandemic just gave me the opportunity to look at medicine and, the public healthcare system in a bit of a different light. And I really wanted to take a career break. I think I was a bit annoyed, frustrated, angered by the fact that as a medic, you only get to treat, one out of many chronic medical conditions, especially if you work in an emergency department and you have people showing up at 2 a.m. with chronic leg pain. That's not something you get excited about. And I just knew that if I stay in that environment, I would get really unhappy. So I took a career break, and formally, I'm still on that break. I just sort of wanted to see if there is a different approach we can take here. Not just treating one out of many different conditions, but actually, can we, do something to optimize health when people are still healthy? Can we be better at prevention? And that's how I got in touch with GlycanAge, really. I got in touch with Professor Gordon Louts, who is one of the co-founders. And he basically gave me the opportunity to sort of see what they do in his lab. And after a few months of internship, I got the job offer. So this is what I do today.
So when you first encountered him, you were just researching. How did you kind of bump into him and like some sort of serendipity?
Okay, so just to put things into context, so I studied and I worked in the UK, which is not something that Croatians do a lot of, I would say. So when people go abroad, they tend to stay abroad. So I came back home. I just wanted to take some rest, really, and then once I got the rest that I needed, I started looking for jobs. I wanted to live here in Croatia. I wanted to sort of settle down here. And I think, Croatia is quite different from the US in a way that there's not that many places you can do good quality research at. There are not that many research institutes. There are only a couple, really. One I got rejection from. And when I got in contact with Professor Louts, I was just really kind of desperate just to volunteer, do unpaid internships, anything. And I was really at the same time very fascinated with what they do. I mean, doing aging research in Croatia is not something that anybody else does. And actually producing that much of good quality research output, that's also not something you see every day here. So for me, that was like a win-win. And yes, I think you can say serendipity helped in a way. I think LinkedIn definitely helped. That definitely paved the way to where I'm today. And, I guess I had something good to offer to the lab as well. I do have quite a different profile from, researchers in our lab. But maybe that was also a plus. I don't know.
Very cool. All right. So let's jump into glycans. What are glycans? Why do they change as we age? What can they tell us?
So glycans are basically carbohydrate polymers. I would say in simple words, you can say they're sugars. I always like to say that they look something like grapes. They have many different subunits, and they're built in a very controlled manner. Glycosylation, which is basically the process of forming glycans and attaching them to different molecules such as lipids, proteins, even RNA, is so-called a post-translational modification. So it's definitely not random. And what glycans really do when you attach them to these different molecules is they enrich the function of these molecules. So you'll find glycans basically, as I said, on top of proteins, lipids, RNA. You'll find them coating the surface of our cells as well, where they basically help our cells communicate to one another. But at our lab, at Ganos lab in Croatia, we've been mainly doing research on glycans that coat IgG, so immunoglobulin G, the most prevalent antibody in the human blood. Obviously, we also looked at, glycan profile of other different proteins that are glycosylated, but basically over the last 15 years, IgG has been the one protein that we studied quite thoroughly. And this is kind of, from that research is where GlycanAge came to be, the GlycanAge test of biological age, because we've seen that glycans on IgG change as we age. So now the question of why they change, I would say that we really don't have a concrete answer to that yet. We do know what the pattern of change is, which is what enabled us to, come up with this test. But as to why exactly why glycans change, I feel that's a multi-level answer to that, and I feel we still have some gaps that we need to fill.
Is there any concept that that inflammation causes glycans to change? Like if you are more inflamed? I mean, I know that the test from reading the results really is kind of an indication of inflammation. Is it kind of a cat and mouse situation where it's indicating inflammation, and maybe it's also a reaction to inflammation?
Exactly. So definitely, I mean, inflammaging, the term that everybody has been so hyped about, is one of those factors. So we know that inflammation, either as a cause or as a consequence, leads to glycans basically changing their looks and their profile. We also know that as we age, the enzymes that are involved in making these glycans will probably become more floppy, less good at doing the job. So that's also one sort of possible factor. There are some other theories that basically the material you need to build glycans, it's difficult to be found. So substrate that you basically have to, have, so those building blocks that, could be missing, which is why it's then difficult to make glycans that would be anti-inflammatory. But yes, you're right. So inflammation, one way or another, definitely plays a part. And there is also something about the microenvironment of B cells and how B cells obviously change with age as well. That's potentially could be a trigger to make, to sort of influence glycans looking older as we age. So having more of, pro-inflammatory cytokines, TNF alpha, IL-6, and so on, is something that could also possibly have such an effect. But I think what's important to say is that, So I just wanted to say that what it's important to say is that pattern of change is the same in all individuals. So it's applicable to all of us, no matter, really what kind of lifestyle, what genetic predisposition we have, our glycans will change. And now, we kind of go back to, theory of aging. What happens with aging is aging a disease and so on. So I think we can get quite philosophical about that.
So we may not know exactly what's causing these changes yet, but we know that it tends to happen in an extremely predictable manner as we age and as we see kind of lifestyle changes. I think we should jump into my test, and I'm going to do a screen share. So this is my result. Like I said, I'm pretty happy with my result. We'll kind of dig into some of these things. This is the great news. Chronologically, I am 54. Biologically, this says I'm at 21. Kind of the joke is, if I'm biologically younger, can I still drink? I don't know if here in the States, I don't know how it is in Croatia, but that's pretty exciting news. And I really want to get into, so do we believe that assuming an average lifespan for males, let's say, is born today is 73. So that's the number right now. If you're born today, your average lifespan, if you're a male in the US, is going to be 73. Is this test saying that I have another 52 years to live according to my biological age? How reasonable or unreasonable is that thought process?
So I think there's so many reasonable, but also so many unreasonable things about aging. And this is definitely not the most unreasonable thing I've heard. I would simply say that, what we're saying with your result is that, instead of expecting your level of inflammation, chronic inflammation, to be, reflecting the age of 54, meaning that this is what we would normally expect to see in a healthy male your age, we see that you have definitely, a lot less of that inflammation. But, as you know yourself, inflammation is just one piece to the puzzle of aging. I think it's sort of many different things and processes happening at the same time. But yes, I think according to our test, you could say that you are very young and that there is a lot of life ahead of you for sure.
That's very good. And you said this wasn't the craziest thought process. What is the craziest thought process people have come from this?
I mean, yeah, I think that question of can you drink alcohol, given your age, I guess you're, kind of thinking about, sort of legally would that be allowed? But I recently had one client who was asking me, so he had a good GlycanAge. It was, I think, just slightly better than his chronological age, sort of, in mid-age of his sort of chronological life, so to speak. But he asked me whether he's okay to continue smoking cigars every now and then, given that his inflammation levels are lower. And, what can I say to that? Can I say that, well, for sure, because your inflammation is low, just go do it, but at the same time, we know that obviously smoking of any kind of tobacco product is not good. So, I think it's interesting to see how people react to receiving their GlycanAge and what kind of thought processes they have. But I think what I kind of think it's a bit unreasonable, and I'm not an expert in this field, but it just seems to me that there are some thought processes, now that kind of suggest that we as human beings could really live much, much, much longer lives, and I have kind of difficulty really perceiving how that could happen. To live to be 200 or older. So I would say there are more unreasonable thought processes than this one that you shared.
So I saw some talks, and I'm probably gonna. It's the way you've said it. I think it's been Borden-Lauts, right? And that's LAUC about predictive capabilities of glycans related to weight loss, both diet and bariatric surgery causing this weight loss. And he also discusses the ability to predict inflammatory diseases, including cardiovascular disease, up to 10 years in advance. Can you talk about some of those results and kind of diving into some of that research?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's important to say that, we've done really a lot of research trying to see how glycans change, not just in the presence of certain diseases, so where we can associate, certain glycan changes to, certain pathologies, but also how glycans change with interventions. And I think you mentioned two nice examples. So, bariatric surgery, effects of different diets as well. But I think what's really interesting, and I think what's exciting, and this is sort of where we are going as a team as well, is using the glycan data, the power of glycan data, to be able to tell our clients and partners as to whether they might be at risk of certain conditions. This is not to say that we are a diagnostic test. We're not a diagnostic test, but mainly using the information that we have to the best abilities. So basically, you mentioned, I think, so cardiovascular and metabolic disease. So we have quite a few nice research studies there. I think one thing is using glycans as a way of, predicting whether somebody's healthy or not. And this is where we've even done studies outside of the scope of cardiovascular and metabolic research. So, for example, we've seen that we can use glycan data to say whether somebody is healthy or whether somebody has, for example, an inflammatory bowel disease, such as, Crohn's disease. But I think what you are referring to is using glycan data to say, okay, are you at risk of developing a condition such as cardiovascular disease or type 2 diabetes in the next 5 to 10 years? And this is what we've seen, especially with these sort of two categories of conditions, you can say. So we've definitely seen that even 10 years ahead of somebody developing insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, we can see that glycans have a different profile baseline profile to what healthy controls who don't develop those diseases have. And I think that's very powerful, because obviously with, cardiovascular disease, even with hypertension, so high blood pressure, which is usually not symptomatic unless you have really, really severe high blood pressure, you don't really, you don't have symptoms. So it's about, screening. It's about, making sure you check your blood pressure regularly. But what if you can have an objective measure that tells you, okay, we see that, you are in the high risk group of, developing hypertension in the next 5 to 10 years. I think that's very valuable. And this is how we sort of really want to build on that prevention work using glycan data.
Have you done any research kind of looking at like celiac disease, right? Because that's I'm in the middle of listening to Autoimmune Fix. I've got an interview with the author Dr. O'Brien tomorrow, and it seems like there's some parallels in this area. Have you guys looked at celiac disease?
So we haven't looked at celiac disease, unfortunately, so far. When it comes to the gut, the bowel, so we looked at, as I said, inflammatory bowel disease, so ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, where we definitely see that, plasma glycans and even IgG glycans change. But celiacs, no, we haven't. It would be really interesting to do that, because even in people who don't have a predisposition to celiac disease, we often get a question of, should I avoid gluten? Is, eating, gluten-rich food gonna make my gut inflammation worse, and so on. So I think that's definitely an area that's very trendy, and that would be, nice and informative for us to look into for sure.
Have you seen any kind of before and afters with people kind of cutting out gluten, having taken a test first and then positive or neutral benefits?
So sometimes it has no benefits, and sometimes it is quite beneficial. I think what's really interesting, and this is what, when you are a guinea pig yourself, right? You do like an N=1 research study on yourself, and you change a few things. People usually change a few things, not just one thing. So they might they might reduce their carbohydrate intake, they might avoid gluten, but they also might do something else. And when we see the GlycanAge changes for the better, then it's kind of difficult to know which intervention that has to do with. But I know of some clients, I have worked with some clients who have cut gluten from the diet, who've had basically a few years difference there for the better, but also people who've not had any effects at all. So I think, it all comes down to, it really depends, which is, an annoying thing to say, but, it does, there's no sort of, complete outcome that would have the same effect for all people.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I think we're going to see more and more research there. And if you're, if you have gluten sensitivities, but not celiac, then, that's going to cause inflammation, and your test is going to show that inflammation. And maybe in the case of those people that it didn't have a benefit, they just don't have that sensitivity. So cutting out something that you're insensitive to won't matter.
Exactly. And I think I think I'll just point out to one research paper that was actually published in preprints just, I think, yesterday or a couple of days ago. And it's a study that we did with metformin. So we basically looked at individuals who were taking metformin. Some were also taking testosterone, supplementation, replacements, and were just taking metformin. And this was something that we had really been hyped about at the start. This was a study that we basically did with one of our partners, Joe Raffaele. We were hoping, not hoping, but we just kind of all had a gut feeling that maybe metformin would basically be a game changer. But it turned out that only in one patient, out of, I think, 50 or 45 or 50 was a total N of those who were taking metformin, did metformin actually make a significant, had a significant effect on GlycanAge for the better, which was quite, I think it's, in a way, surprising, because we did have some few clients who came to us, who, tested their GlycanAge a few times, on metformin, not on metformin, and we saw how, things change for the better in many of these cases. So, but, based on this study that we've just published, it doesn't seem that metformin is a game changer for everyone, which to me sort of makes sense. I think you have to know where somebody is in terms of not just obviously their glucose metabolism, but all the other sort of, you can say, hallmarks of aging. You have to know their age, all of that. But yeah, I think that just showcases how, something can work, can be a miracle drug for one person, but maybe for all the other 40 something, not really.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
Yeah, I think one thing that it shows, right, when you start thinking about, glycans and you're talking about sugars, right, like carbohydrate polymers, and we can kind of abbreviate that sugars, is this tied into kind of your insulin and glucose level system? And I would suggest that metformin not having an impact kind of shows them to be separate things systemically in the body. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first thing you said, whether there is any, I would say, correlation, or maybe better say association between insulin metabolism, glucose metabolism, and GlycanAge, we definitely see that GlycanAge does associate quite nicely, for example, with HbA1c, which is, a nice measure of how, of the sort of previous, 3-month regulation period of your glucose. We do know that glycans definitely change when somebody's insulin resistant, when they're diabetic, and so on. And, there's definitely that association because of the impact of inflammation, right? But I think metformin, I think there is a lot of hype about metformin simply because of other potential effects metformin can have on other different systems, meaning that it could be, a good sort of gerotherapeutic, which actually, a lot of hype, but we don't really have one good proper study to show that. I mean, I know that Nir Barzilai is sort of, conducting that big TAME study, which is still ongoing. So I think I would say, as for many different interventions, especially pharmacological ones, there is still a lot of hype with not that much evidence. It doesn't mean that, we won't see any effects, but I think it will come down to, again, maybe a few individuals responding really nicely, maybe many not having any kind of benefit from it. But yes, I think metformin is an interesting drug, and we just need some more time to see how it actually works and how it could work.
Very cool. So I want to jump in. So there's some interesting information on my results. One of these is you're looking at, it kind of has the nomenclature of a glycan youth. It's looking at galactoses and kind of this simple representation, I think, of a glycan, and it has 2 galactoses on it. Can you talk about what that looks like and why that's an important piece to be looking at?
Yeah, sure. So, as I said, glycans are built in a very regulated fashion. As I said, it's almost kind of, you can imagine you're building Lego blocks, but there are rules you have to follow. So, one of those rules is that if you kind of compare what we can see on the screen now, youth and shield, you can't form a shield glycan if you previously don't have a youth glycan as a base that you can build shield on, which basically means that, so you need youth. Youth, I mean, we kind of call it here youth. Normally in sort of, research, we talk about glycans with galactoses, or this galactosylation feature, which is normally thought of as being very, anti-inflammatory. Overall, I think if you kind of go into some specifics, you can see that even galactose and galactosylation can lead to some pro-inflammatory sort of interactions down the line, but overall very anti-inflammatory. And the reason we call it youth is simply because as we age, we tend to have less and less of these youth glycans. So that's sort of a consequence of aging, you can say. But also, youth goes down when in the presence of certain chronic disease conditions, in the presence of lifestyle choices which may not be optimal. So yeah, it's a very good indication of whether somebody's healthy or whether there is possibly any kind of pathology in the background.
And you kind of mentioned that on here, what's kind of labeled as a glycan shield, you've got a sialic acid that's on top of even the galactoses. And so this seems like it might have a compounding effect where if you don't have the glycan youth, right, the galactoses, then you can't have the celiac. And so your test results start just kind of plummeting because you can't even get the score on the second one because the first one doesn't exist. What's being represented here?
So sialic acids are, again, very anti-inflammatory. We know that basically they act as a switch between preventing and promoting inflammation on this sort of IgG, and how then IgG behaves and how it down the line activates certain pathways, complement pathways, or whether it has an effect on Fc gamma receptors and so on. But shield one usually leads to anti-inflammatory reactions down the line, and this one is an interesting one. So I can tell you there was one study that was done in mice. They had obese, hypertensive mice, and they were giving them sialic acid precursors as supplements. And they saw that they could basically deal with that hypertension effectively, which is an interesting way to look at things. And I think a question you can ask from that is, can we do that in humans? Something that hasn't been looked into yet, hasn't been tried, but it definitely represents, it tells you what potential shield has in, as the name suggests, basically shielding you and protecting you from inflammation. So it is basically your first line of inflammation that will also, you also, in order to have shield, as I said, you need to have adequate youth. And you are right. If you have really low youth, then you won't be able to have that shield. So, all of these lichens are kind of connected to one another.
And I think that kind of mirrors at least my impression of like inflammation, right? So people tend to have inflammation, they tend to have low grade inflammation, and then it seems to go from manageable to incredibly unmanageable or really a disease state fairly quickly. And if you're looking at these two pieces in that way, that kind of seems to be described there. And then you've got kind of pro-inflammatory. This really is, I think, the inverse of the youth, right? So you're looking at the missing galactoses. So it's pretty straightforward. And I think this number, and then the next is lifestyle. And this is looking at glycans that have a bisection. Can you talk about that and its impact?
Yes. So bisecting glycans also somewhat change with age. So we do see that as we age, similar to youth, but to a much lower extent, much lower, we see that sort of its proportion goes up. But what's interesting is that we know that there are certain lifestyle associations, certain lifestyle behaviors, you can say, or passive exposures that make this index or make this sort of structure go up. We're talking about quality of air exposure, we're talking about smoking, yes, we're talking about obesity, we're also talking about intake of ultra processed foods, which is just on the rise and through the sky, very high. So so some of these things associate quite nicely. There was also one study that was done. It was a Leiden longevity study in the Netherlands that basically looked at trying to find the glycan structure that could tell us a bit about predisposition to familial longevity, especially in middle-aged adults. And they did see that it was this structure that we refer to as lifestyle, so bisecting glycans on IgG, that have the best capacity to be those predictors. So the lower the value of this lifestyle is, the higher the likelihood of sort of, living a longer life. I think a similar was also done in Japan. They had They had a similar study with similar findings. So a lot can be learned from glycans, not just, from this one, you can say, yes, it can tell me about lifestyle, but it can also tell you about different things as well.
And then we can talk about median, where it's looking at, with one galactose, and this tends to be also genetic, right? So you kind of described this a little bit genetic, but also lifestyle. Is median kind of more genetic?
Yeah, so median is really more genetic, and I think extremes, so super high median and super low median, those are the things you would want to really not have. You would really be want to sitting in the middle, as you said. So yes, median has only one galactose at the terminal end, which still means that it can offer some protection against inflammation. But it's mainly really trying to find behaviors and interventions that work to make that balance between youth and mature better. That will then, have a significant impact on GlycanAge and on inflammation.
Okay, so I think you guys, I've heard somewhere it's either close to, maybe even more now, 200,000 data points have kind of gone into this effort and ongoing research. What are the lifestyle modifications that affect GlycanAge and ostensibly biological age the most?
So I would say, when we talk about longevity interventions in general, I think we can all agree on caloric restriction having a significant sort of effect on, prolonging lifespan, but I think also more importantly, optimizing health span. So I would say that's one of them. I think in the context of women's health, we see that, well, in the context of men's health as well, but I think in women it's more prominent. It's a hormone replacement therapy during perimenopause and then menopause, which anecdotally and also from one of the pilot studies we've done has an enormous positive effect on GlycanAge, which is not, it's not unusual and it's not unexpected. So we know that we both, so men and women, both need estrogen really to make our glycans happy. It's just in females because, physiology and anatomy, that's just more prominent, as I said. But we know that when you're, circulating estrogen in the blood, if those levels go down, and which is what happens, first during perimenopause when those levels oscillate, and then during post-menopause where you don't really produce estrogen anymore, that this is what causes accelerated aging in females. So by replacing that estrogen and, progesterone and testosterone if needed, GlycanAge gets better. And in some women, we're talking about a couple of years, and some we're talking about 5 to 7 years, but I've also seen differences of 10, 15, even 20 years.
Very cool. So, so when you say calorie restriction, there's the I don't know, the best researched 30% reduction in calories tends to have a 30% increase in lifespan. Are you talking about that, or how about intermittent fasting? Is it just being a good BMI may not be the best rating, but having a good kind of body fat to body mass ratio?
Yeah, so caloric restriction that we've researched was in the context of overweight, and obese individuals. I think in those studies we looked at BMI, but I think much better to look at, more detailed body analysis measures, so, total body fat, visceral fat, muscle mass, and so on. So that being an intervention that you sustain for a couple of months, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. I think in the long run, if we're talking about intermittent fasting on a daily basis, if we're talking about, or any other form of time restricted eating, or we're talking about, cyclical 48, 72 hours fasts every month, we don't really have that data. We haven't looked at that. It would be super interesting to look at. So if anyone has any samples that we can work on, we're more than happy to collaborate, because that's one of the most frequently asked questions, I would say, is, one of them is 6 into 8 fasting, daily fasting going to help me, going to help my GlycanAge? Or, do I have to go, do I have to dive deeper? Do I have to do 36, 48, 72 hours, every month, every couple of months, go into that autophagy and get benefits from that? And, from a glycan point of view, we don't have that data. I can tell you that anecdotally, again, I think similar to what we talk about, metformin, celiac, gluten, there are some people in whom daily fasting, from 1 meal a day or to, 16 to 8 does wonders. And there are some in whom it has like a harmful effect. So yeah, difficult to know, but without a proper study, we don't really know that yet.
Talk a little bit about exercise, because my understanding is kind of extreme, not so good. Where does that, if you've got any kind of idea of where that transition happens, that'd be interesting to understand.
Sorry, did you say exercise, or I didn't quite hear?
Exercise. Yeah. And my understanding is like extreme exercise can be challenging. And so like where does that line happen if you've got any kind of spitball ideas?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I mean, I've had when I started working, I had a few clients who were sort of preparing, and doing prep for half marathons. And during that prep time, did their GlycanAge, and it was, much, much higher than their chronological age. Obviously, they were doing intense prep, high intensity, combined with, low to moderate intensity trainings on a daily basis, sometimes twice a day. And, I've had some other clients who are not, not professional sportsmen, sportswomen doing, high intensity, especially sort of high intensity cardio training twice a day, in whom, GlycanAge suffered because of that. I think it's difficult to give you sort of a threshold that you should not cross to get there. I think, if you are a regular person who is not a sportsman or a sportswoman and you do training twice a day, that's probably like some kind of a red flag there. And, your GlycanAge is likely to suffer. But I think we see that avoiding doing, avoiding training like 2 days in a row at high intensity. So, if you do that 2, 3, 4 days in a row, that's probably, highly likely to have your GlycanAge suffer. So, introducing rest days after 2 days of, high intensity is something that definitely helps. But yes, you're right. So, overexerting and being in that sort of relative energy deficiency, it's something that has a negative effect on GlycanAge. And I would say it's probably one of the most common factors that leads to a higher GlycanAge in otherwise healthy, sort of youngish to middle-age adults.
Have you looked at any, so we talked about metformin. Are there any kind of supplements out there that show a trend in a good direction, or medication?
So we've done a study. We've done a study on omega-3, which we've seen helps GlycanAge to some extent, but mainly helps that dissecting glycans of lifestyle glycan in otherwise healthy people. And I think we forgot to mention that actually bisecting, so lifestyle and median indices, they don't really have an effect on GlycanAge. So because, simply of how GlycanAge calculation is made. So yes, I mean, that would change the GlycanAge profile a tiny bit, but will mainly impact the lifestyle index, which will actually not impact the end GlycanAge. So omega-3 we looked at, so that you can say had a beneficial effect. What else did we look at? So I think with supplements and medications, we're actually, I wouldn't say we're a bit behind, but we still have a lot of work to do, because that's not been our forte so far. We've mainly been looking into sort of diet, exercise, sleep apnea, so on. So metformin, the study was just published, and we have a few sort of pilot studies ongoing, but we would definitely like to get answers on things like rapamycin, rapalogs, because obviously that, people ask about that. Any sort of other, there is that we did one study with Cheetos, so that's an NAD plus, it's not NAD plus, it's NAD that comes from niacin. And we did see that there were some individuals who, whose GlycanAge also changed for the better at repeat testing, but not always. So again, we see differences there. But yes, I think this is an avenue we are exploring, and we want to do more studies on.
And how about sleep? Because you mentioned sleep. You've done some investigation there.
So we looked at sleep apnea actually, and so we looked at people who, so sleep apnea. I think it's an interesting thing because a lot of people come to us either with sort of semi-diagnosed or self-diagnosed sleep apnea, or people who are heavy snorers, or people who have a bit of a mouth breathing issue. So with sleep apnea, we did see that GlycanAge tends to get a bit worse. But I think what's really interesting, and we would definitely want to do research, and that would be sort of mouth breathing and how obviously that affects not just GlycanAge, but things like, HRV and all the different sort of maybe other biomarkers that you can measure, because that seems to be quite a prominent issue in many so-called healthy young or, middle-aged adults.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about mouth taping, and I've literally not looked at it at all. I sleep with my mouth closed and breathe through my nose, so I don't need the tape. But I haven't even looked in like what are the benefits of the fact that I do breathe through my nose, through my mouth. So that's something that I'll as with each of these speaker events, I walk away with more homework to do. What can we do? Can you talk about any confirmations? Can speak about the blue zones and what we typically think about the blue zones, and how have you looked, with GlycanAge testing into those zones?
Yeah, so I mean, I find personally blue zones fascinating. It's really nice to see that more and more of the general public are picking up on this. I guess simply because of the Netflix documentary, so that's pretty good. And having a 2.0 now blue zone, which is Singapore, that I had really opportunity to explore this past summer, which was amazing. I think a lot can be taken and learned from the blue zones. I think what I found really interesting, which is also really difficult to measure in a way, not just with glycans, but with anything else, is the common things that seem to unite all the blue zones. So things like social connection, things like purpose in life, all those soft things that it's not like you take a pill or, you sleep longer, or you do certain physical activity and then you keep repeating that, and then you can remeasure after 3, 6, 12 months. Because those seem to be the things that unify all of these different blue zones. They have different diets, physical movement, exercise might even differ, body composition might differ, but it's, social connection, purpose, and that sort of cognitive ability well into older age, as we would call it, that kind of seems to be fascinating. I think the closest we have to this is basically looking at stress response, but this is mainly what we've done. There was a couple of studies done in lab animals, so in mice, sort of for PTSD, like induced like stress response. But yeah, I think from glycan point of view, it's difficult to basically draw any comparisons to that.
Can you, and we've got a minimum amount of time. I want to make sure we get to our wrap-up questions, but a quick kind of compare and contrast, right? There are other biological tests out there. Where do you think their strengths are? Where do you think maybe there's some other pieces to incorporate, if there are, with GlycanAge? Like, how would you compare and contrast?
Oof, wow. Are you sure we want to go down? We're going to down this road. It's quite a complex question, but I think so. I will really try my best to be succinct here. So there was a really good, really recent paper that was published in the Cell. It was by Mokri and colleagues just this year, a couple of months ago, I think, that looked at many different biological age tests and markers, including us, and none of us were authors on that paper. And they established us as really as the best test if you're looking to get some feedback on, interventions, if you want to improve your, health span. And I feel like we really do that. I think that is our biggest strength, right? I mean, yes, you can say that, that you have to sleep better, that you have to eat better, but there will be certain interventions, and I think we're talking here about mainly supplements and their therapeutics, where you don't know whether that can have an effect on you or not. So I think using GlycanAge as a before and after is really valuable. I think other tests really do measure different things, and I know that you, I think at the start, mentioned DNA methylation. I'd say if you're interested in, maybe rate of aging, maybe certain tests would be better suited. But I think what's missing right now in this field in general is trying to get to the composite of all these different tests, right? Because different tests will tell you about a different hallmark of aging in a way. So as I said, yes, chronic inflammation is one big part, but it's not all of it. But then we kind of go into the complex and the problem of aging and, theory of aging. Is it hallmarks of aging? What's the mechanism and so on? So, I think for now, GlycanAge is really, really, really good if you want to get that feedback. And if you want to use that as a motivation to change things, as a wake-up call. And I think that is really one of the best uses there are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? So we're looking at what we can control, because I can imagine, and maybe you could speak to this because maybe I'm wrong, that there are some things that methylation can look at. In fact, you can look at kind of DNA structure, and you can say like, hey, these genes throw you into a propensity for Alzheimer's or cancer or whatever, and those are challenges that will biologically shorten your life. And I'm assuming GlycanAge can't look into those, or those things aren't reflected in a GlycanAge. And so that's independent and maybe more of what people are thinking about in terms of like, what is my biological clock, right? Like, when am I going to die? I think that's the kind of answer people are looking for. And then GlycanAge is saying, what can I control? Hey, this is the perfect test for letting you know if the interventions that you're attempting and trying and working on are actually having an impact.
Yeah, it's actionable. And, people come to us and they want an action plan. Sometimes they're ready to change. Sometimes they, still in two minds. But when they're ready to change, they want something that can act on. And this is what we are giving them. And I think this is why the, ongoing research and the future research is super important, because people want to know, have you showed in this study, does this supplement work? Does this intervention work? And obviously, we can always go back to studies, bearing in mind that, N equals 1, then you are probably the best kind of research participant for your own study, as we have seen.
All right. So now we've got our wrap-up questions, and we can go pretty quickly through these. Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
No, not really. I'm not really into, long lifespan. I'm really about health span. I don't know. I would like to have kids and have grandkids one day. And if I can see my grandkids grow up a bit, that would be fantastic. So I would be fine with like 70 or something.
Okay. And how long do you think humans can live?
Well, with the current level of knowledge, I don't think we can push much against like maybe what Mrs. Command, the longest living French lady had, like 120. I feel like we're very limited by how little we know still about aging. But, I think, maybe ask me in a year or 2 years, I think things will change, and I hope they will change.
Yeah, I think that's some of the summary, because I've asked all of our expert panelists that question, and it just comes to like, okay, well, what can we do today? But what things are just changing so fast. It's just amazing. Yeah. All right, what are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts, because everybody likes shortcuts, for longevity and a long health span that you would share?
I would say sleep, value the night sleep. It's so easy to not do it right for you. And I feel it's fascinating how we can, be willing to pay thousands of dollars or pounds, euros for supplements, but we won't have an extra hour of sleep. So I think investing in sleep, that would be my first suggestion. I do like the idea of just being very keen on experimenting with things. I think that's another way of getting successful in this sort of longevity industry. You have to be curious and you have to experiment. And I mean, for me, like currently I've been really looking into, for example, cold exposure, cold plunges. I find it really interesting and fascinating. And I think sleep, experimentation, and keep working on inner self. I think, being happy on the inside, whether that's through, grounding, mindfulness, meditation, anything that works for you.
So we've got sleep and focus on inner self. Is that good?
Yeah.
And that makes me think, and again, we are running out of time, Have you looked at kind of saunas and seen any good, bad, nothing?
No, we haven't. No, we haven't. But I would be so happy if we could get some hot sauna data. We could get some winter swimmers, people who frequently do cold exposures. Yeah, I would love to do that. So if there is anyone out there who has any samples, let us know. We would love to do that for you.
All right, Dr. Sironic, how can people reach you if they want to get in contact with you?
So I think it's best via LinkedIn. I absolutely love LinkedIn. I think it's one of the most powerful tools we can have, and saved my life a couple of times. So yeah, please feel free to connect, follow, reach out, message.
Okay, through LinkedIn. And what's the website?
What's the website for LinkedIn or for GlycanAge?
Oh, it's GlycanAge, right? It's is it just GlycanAge or what's the whole?
Yeah, GlycanAge, or me. Like you can just LinkedIn with me personally, like using my name and my surname. More than happy, yeah, absolutely to do that.
Excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
So super near future, I'm speaking at the Longevity Summit at the Buck Institute. So super excited about that. That's in a couple of weeks. And then attending A4M in Las Vegas. Super excited about that. I think, North America is a different continent for us. I think especially when it comes to longevity practices. But I think in the last near future, I'm really getting started into understanding theories of aging. I think there is a chap called David James, a British biogerontologist who has come up with a slightly different theory of aging to what we have now with hallmarks. So really interested to know more and read up on that and see where his thinking and thinking of some other people get us.
It sounds like you've landed in a place that is providing a lot of satisfaction, right? Like, because you were back to Croatia, what am I going to do? And then you've landed here and you seem to be thriving in this space. So
it's super cool. It's cognitively challenging. It's great because you get to connect with people like yourself and like people that I've never really even thought I would connect. And it's one fascinating industry. I think general public is interested in it, and I think that's also important. You have to think about the greater good, right? There's money flowing in, and you always need money to do research as well. So yeah, I think for now it's I would say personally really, 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 really good place for me. And for anybody else who's maybe kind of thinking about kind of leaving medicine, but still being in touch, but having a different perspective on it.
That's very cool. All right. So you can find her on LinkedIn. It's spelled different than I'm pronouncing it. It's Dr. Lucija Sironic, and that's Lucija, and then last name Sironic. Correct me if I missed anything. And then the website for the test is glycanage.com. Dr. Sironic, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. And I really was happy to be here. Thank you once again.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.